4 professors, 1 student, a web of secrets no one was supposed to uncover. What started as private conversations turned into manipulation, then blackmail, and finally bloodshed. But here's the twist. What if the killer wasn't the one pulling the strings? Stay with this story till the end, because the truth behind that night will make you question everything you think you know about guilt. Westbridge University had always been known for its calm atmosphere. Located on the edge of a quiet town, it was the kind of place where students focused on their studies, professors kept to themselves, and nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. Crime was almost unheard of. The biggest concern on campus was usually missed deadlines or exam stress. That's why no one could have imagined how everything would change the day Ethan Hale arrived. It was the middle of the semester when Ethan transferred into the postgraduate psychology program. At 23, he was older than most new students, but he carried himself with a confidence that made him stand out immediately. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking, yet people noticed him. There was something about the way he spoke, calm, measured, and deeply attentive, that made others feel important. Students warmed up to him quickly, but it wasn't just students. Within the first week, Ethan had already made an impression on several faculty members. He asked thoughtful questions in lectures, stayed behind after class to discuss ideas, and showed a level of emotional intelligence that even surprised experienced professors. It was during one of these after-class conversations that he first connected with Dr. Lillian Grant. Dr. Grant was one of the most respected psychology lecturers at Westbridge. Known for her sharp mind and professional distance, she rarely engaged with students beyond academics. But Ethan was different. He didn't just ask questions, he listened carefully to her answers, often adding insights that felt unusually deep for someone his age. "You see patterns most people miss," she told him once, half impressed. Ethan smiled slightly. "I've always been observant." That simple exchange marked the beginning of a connection neither of them fully understood at the time. Around the same period, Ethan began attending literature seminars led by Professor Marcus Doyle. Doyle was charismatic, popular, and known for his passionate teaching style. He often blurred the lines between professional and personal discussions in class, which made students feel closer to him. Ethan quickly became one of his favorites. After one lecture, Ethan stayed behind and challenged Doyle's interpretation of a novel. Instead of being offended, Doyle seemed intrigued. Their debate lasted nearly an hour. From that day on, Ethan was often invited for private discussions. Then there was Dr. Sarah Klein, a quiet researcher who preferred solitude over social interaction. She rarely spoke unless necessary and avoided attention whenever possible. Most students found her intimidating. Ethan didn't. He approached her in the university library one evening, asking for help with a research paper. What started as a simple academic request turned into long, quiet conversations between the shelves. Unlike others, Ethan didn't push her to talk. He gave her space, listened patiently, and spoke softly. For someone like Sarah, that was rare. Slowly, she began to open up. The last of the 4 was Professor Alan Reed, a strict and disciplined academic known for his no-nonsense attitude. Students feared him. He had little patience for excuses and even less for emotional discussions. Ethan approached him differently. Instead of trying to impress him emotionally, Ethan showed pure discipline. He submitted flawless assignments, followed every rule, and demonstrated respect in every interaction. Reed noticed, "You're not like the others," Reed said once. Ethan replied simply, "I prefer structure." That answer earned Reed's approval. Within just a few weeks, Ethan had managed to build 4 very different relationships, each carefully tailored, each seemingly genuine. To an outsider, it looked like he was simply a dedicated student, forming strong academic connections. But there were small details that didn't quite fit. Ethan seemed to know things he shouldn't. He remembered personal details professors barely mentioned. He appeared at the right place at the right time, often coincidentally running into them outside scheduled hours. His questions sometimes felt too specific, almost as if he already knew the answers. At night, while most students slept, Ethan stayed awake. In his small dorm room, his laptop screen often glowed until early morning. Files were neatly organized into folders, names, dates, notes. Conversations were written down in detail. Observations were recorded with precision. It didn't look like normal academic work. It looked like preparation. Back on campus, the relationships continued to grow. Dr. Grant began scheduling extra sessions with him, claiming he had exceptional potential. Professor Doyle started sharing personal stories during their private discussions. Dr. Klein trusted him with sensitive research ideas. Even Professor Reed allowed him more academic freedom than any other student. Each of them believed they had a unique connection with Ethan. Each of them felt understood in a way they hadn't experienced before, and each of them believed that connection was theirs alone. But they were wrong. Ethan moved carefully between them, never overlapping conversations, never raising suspicion. He adapted effortlessly, becoming exactly who each person needed him to be: a listener, a challenger, a supporter, a perfect student. Yet behind that calm and composed exterior, something else was building. Something darker, because Ethan Hale hadn't come to Westbridge University by chance, and he hadn't chosen those 4 professors randomly. They all had something in common, something hidden beneath their professional reputations, something Ethan had already discovered. And as the quiet campus continued its routine, unaware of the storm forming within its walls, Ethan smiled. Because everything was going exactly as planned. The annual Westbridge University Gala was meant to be a celebration. Held in the grand hall at the center of campus, the event brought together faculty, students, and guests for an evening of speeches, music, and quiet networking. Soft golden lights filled the room, and the atmosphere carried a sense of elegance and control, everything Westbridge prided itself on. But beneath that polished surface, something was about to break. Ethan Hale arrived late. Dressed in a simple black suit, he blended in easily with the crowd. Yet, as always, his presence didn't go unnoticed. A few students greeted him, but he didn't stay long in any one conversation. His attention was elsewhere. He was watching, carefully, across the hall. Dr. Lillian Grant stood near a group of colleagues, engaged in polite conversation. But her focus wasn't on them. Every few moments her eyes drifted across the room, searching, until they found Ethan. Their gaze locked for just a second. Ethan gave a small, almost unnoticeable nod. Dr. Grant quickly looked away. Near the stage, Professor Marcus Doyle was in his element, laughing, speaking confidently, enjoying the attention of those around him. But even he seemed distracted. When Ethan passed by, Doyle's smile faded slightly. There was tension there, unspoken but real. Earlier that evening, Ethan had tried to speak with him privately. The conversation had been brief and strange. "You've been distant," Doyle had said. Ethan's response was calm. "Have I?" There was something in his tone that Doyle couldn't quite understand. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't familiar either. Now, watching him from across the room, Doyle felt something he hadn't expected to feel toward Ethan: unease. At the far end of the hall, near a quiet table, Dr. Sarah Klein sat alone. She wasn't comfortable in large gatherings, and tonight was no different. Her hands rested around a glass she hadn't touched, her eyes scanning the room without really focusing. Then Ethan approached. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said gently. Sarah gave a small, nervous smile. "I don't belong at events like this." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "You belong more than most people here." For a moment, the noise of the room seemed to fade for her. But then she noticed something. "You've been different lately," she said quietly. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Different how? I don't know," she admitted, "just distracted." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced briefly across the room toward the others, then back at her. "Maybe tonight will clear things up," he said. There was something about the way he said it that made Sarah uneasy. Standing near the entrance, observing everything with sharp eyes, was Professor Alan Reed. Unlike the others, Reed didn't rely on emotion, he relied on patterns. And Ethan's behavior had started to form one. Inconsistent interactions, unusual timing, subtle changes in tone. Reed had been watching him for weeks now. And tonight confirmed it. Something was wrong. As the evening progressed, the tension grew. Dr. Grant noticed Ethan speaking briefly with Doyle. Doyle saw Ethan leaving Sarah's table. Sarah watched him exchange a glance with Reed. Each moment was small. But together they formed something undeniable, a connection. Then, just before midnight, everything changed. Phones began to buzz, one after another. Dr. Grant checked hers first. Her expression froze. Moments later, Doyle looked at his screen, and his face went pale. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the message. Even Reed's calm demeanor shifted slightly. The message was identical. "Meet me in lab building C, midnight. Come alone or everything gets exposed. No name, no explanation." But they all knew who it was from. Panic settled in quickly. Dr. Grant's mind raced. What did he mean by exposed? Doyle felt a cold wave of realization. How much does he know? Sarah's breathing became shallow. This can't be happening. Reed's thoughts were sharper. This ends tonight. Each of them believed they were being singled out. None of them knew the others had received the same message. At exactly midnight, they arrived. Lab Building C stood at the edge of campus, isolated and dark. Most of its rooms were unused at that hour, the silence inside almost suffocating. Dr. Grant entered first, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. Doyle followed minutes later, his movements tense. Sarah hesitated at the entrance before stepping inside. Reed arrived last, his expression unreadable, and then they saw each other. For a moment no one spoke. Confusion filled the room. "Why are you here?" Doyle asked, his voice sharp. "I could ask you the same thing, Doctor." Grant replied. Sarah looked between them, her face pale. "You all got the message too, didn't you?" Silence. That was answer enough. Then a slow clap echoed through the lab. All eyes turned toward the sound. Ethan stepped out of the shadows. Calm, composed, exactly as always, but this time there was no warmth in his expression. "I was wondering how long it would take," he said. Doyle stepped forward, anger rising. "What is this? What are you doing?" Ethan ignored the question. Instead, he looked at each of them, one by one. "You all thought you were special," he said quietly. "That what we had was unique." Dr. Grant's voice trembled. "Ethan, stop this." But he continued, "You shared things with me, trusted me." He paused. "That was your first mistake." The realization hit them all at once. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. "You've been lying to us," Sarah whispered. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Not lying, just reflecting what you wanted to see." Reed stepped forward, his voice firm. "What do you want?" Ethan smiled faintly. "The truth." Suddenly he pulled out his phone and pressed play. A voice filled the room, Dr. Grant's voice, confessing something deeply personal. Her face drained of color. Then another recording, Doyle, then Sarah, then even Reed. Every secret, every hidden truth laid bare. The room erupted. Accusations, anger, fear. "You manipulated us," Doyle shouted. "You recorded everything." Dr. Grant's voice broke. "This is insane," Sarah whispered. Reed remained silent, but his eyes never left Ethan. And then something shifted. The anger wasn't just directed at Ethan anymore. It turned inward, toward each other. "You told him that," Doyle snapped at Grant. "And you didn't." She fired back. Sarah stepped back, overwhelmed. "Stop, just stop." But it didn't stop because the truth was out. And once the truth is exposed, there's no controlling what comes next. In the chaos, voices grew louder. Movements became sharper, unpredictable, dangerous. Then a loud crash. A scream, and suddenly everything changed. The silence that followed the chaos in Lab Building C did not last long. Within minutes of the first scream, campus security received multiple alerts: unusual noise, possible violence, and a triggered emergency alarm inside the science wing. By the time officers arrived, the building had fallen eerily quiet again, too quiet. The first officer stepped into the lab cautiously, flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Hello? Campus security?" No response. As he moved deeper inside, the beam of light revealed a scene that would later be described as one of the most disturbing incidents in Westbridge University's history. Furniture was overturned, glass equipment lay shattered across the floor, papers were scattered everywhere, some torn, others stained. And then the bodies. Professor Marcus Doyle was found near the center of the room, motionless. There were clear signs of a violent struggle. A nearby metal stand had been knocked over, suggesting he hadn't gone down without a fight. Across the room, Dr. Lillian Grant lay collapsed beside a lab table. Her hand still clutched a broken piece of glass, as if she had tried to defend herself in the final moments. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. Near the far wall, barely conscious, was Dr. Sarah Klein. She was alive, but just barely. Her breathing was shallow, her clothes stained, and her eyes unfocused. When paramedics reached her, she tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out clearly. The only thing she managed to whisper was, "Ethan." Then she lost consciousness, but one person was missing. Professor Alan Reed. There was no sign of him anywhere in the lab. No body. No clear indication of where he had gone. Only absence. Within hours, the campus was locked down. Police vehicles surrounded Westbridge University. Students were instructed to remain in their dorms. Faculty members were questioned immediately. What had once been a peaceful, academic environment was now an active crime scene. And at the center of it all was Ethan Hale. At first, investigators weren't sure what role Ethan had played. Was he a victim who escaped, a witness, or something far more dangerous? That question didn't take long to answer. Ethan's dorm room was searched early the next morning. What officers found inside changed everything. His laptop. At first glance, it looked ordinary until they opened the files, folders, dozens of them. Each labeled with names, dates, and categories. Inside were detailed records of conversations, personal notes, and private information about the 4 professors. Some files contained saved messages. Others held audio recordings clear, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Every secret the professors had shared, Ethan had kept. Detective Aaron Blake, the lead investigator on the case, quickly realized this wasn't a random incident. This was planned. He told his team every step of it. The recordings painted a clear picture. Ethan had built relationships with all 4 professors. He had gained their trust, and then he had used that trust to gather leverage. But something still didn't add up. If Ethan had orchestrated everything, why wasn't he among the victims? And more importantly, where was he now? As the investigation deepened, a timeline began to form. Witnesses from the gala confirmed seeing Ethan interacting with all 4 professors that night. Security footage showed him entering lab building C shortly before midnight. Then, approximately 40 minutes later, he was seen leaving. Alone, calm, walking, not running. There was no visible panic in his body language, no urgency, no sign that he had just been part of a violent incident. That detail unsettled investigators the most. Then came the discovery that shifted the case even further. Hidden deep within Ethan's files was a separate folder, locked, encrypted. It took the digital forensics team several hours to access it. When they finally did, they uncovered Ethan's past. Years earlier, Ethan's mother, Dr. Rebecca Hale, had been a professor at another university. She was respected, intelligent, and dedicated to her work. But her career ended abruptly. According to records, she had been involved in a major academic scandal, one that included multiple faculty members. The details were unclear, but the outcome was devastating. She lost her position, her reputation, everything she had built. Months later, she was found dead, officially ruled as an accident, but the circumstances were never fully explained. Ethan was just a teenager at the time, and from the files he left behind, it was clear he never accepted that explanation. In one document, investigators found a single line, written repeatedly, "They protect their own." Detective Blake leaned back in his chair as he reviewed the evidence. This isn't just about Westbridge, he said quietly. "This is personal." The theory began to take shape. Ethan didn't choose those professors randomly. He studied them, watched them, identified their weaknesses, and recreated the same kind of environment that had destroyed his mother. But this time he controlled it. Still, one question remained unanswered. If this was revenge, why did it spiral into violence? Dr. Sarah Klein regained consciousness 2 days later. She became the key witness, but her condition made questioning difficult. When she finally spoke, her account was fragmented, pieces of memory scattered and unclear. "There was shouting," she said weakly. "Everyone was arguing." "What about Ethan?" Detective Blake asked. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember. He played the recordings. Her breathing grew heavier. Then everything just fell apart. According to her, the confrontation escalated quickly. The professors turned on each other. Accusations, blame, anger. What Ethan had exposed didn't just reveal secrets, it shattered trust. But even her story had gaps. Moments she couldn't recall. Details that didn't align perfectly with the evidence. And then there was Alan Reed, still missing. Search teams combed the campus and surrounding areas. No trace, no witnesses, nothing. It was as if he had vanished. As the days passed, media coverage exploded. Headlines called it the Westbridge Bloodbath. Speculation spread rapidly. Was Ethan a manipulator, a mastermind, or something else entirely? Detective Blake stood at the center of it all, staring at the evidence board filled with photos, timelines, and connections. 4 professors, 1 student, 2 dead, 1 injured, 1 missing, and 1 truth that refused to settle. What really happened inside that lab? Because the more they investigated, the less certain everything became. The days following the Westbridge incident felt unreal. The campus remained closed, classes suspended indefinitely. Students were sent home, faculty members placed on leave, and the once quiet university became the center of a national media storm. News vans lined the streets outside the gates, reporters speaking in urgent tones about secrets, manipulation, and murder. But behind the headlines, the truth was still incomplete, and for Detective Aaron Blake, that was unacceptable. 3 days after regaining consciousness, Dr. Sarah Klein was finally stable enough to give a full statement. She sat in a quiet hospital room, pale but composed, her hands resting tightly together. Detective Blake sat across from her, recorder placed carefully on the table between them. "Take your time," he said calmly. "Start from when you entered the lab." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes unfocused as she replayed the night in her mind. "I didn't know the others would be there," she began. "When I walked in and saw them, I realized something was very wrong." Her voice trembled slightly. Everyone looked scared, confused. Then Ethan came out. She paused. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He just stood there, like he was waiting for something. Blake leaned forward slightly. "What happened next?" He started talking. Sarah said, "About truth, about how we all hide things." Her grip tightened. Then he played the recordings. The room felt colder as she spoke. Everything came out. Things we never thought anyone would hear, things we were ashamed of. She swallowed hard. "No one trusted anyone anymore." Blake nodded, and then Sarah hesitated. "This part was harder. It wasn't Ethan who made things violent," she said quietly. Blake's expression shifted slightly. "What do you mean?" Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with something between fear and realization. "We did." According to her, the room spiraled out of control within minutes. Doyle accused Grant. Grant fired back. Reed tried to take control, but no one was listening. Everyone was talking over each other, voices rising, emotions breaking through years of control and professionalism. "It felt like everything we had buried just exploded," Sarah said. Blake remained silent, letting her continue. "Doyle was the first to snap," she said. He moved toward Grant, shouting, accusing her of things I didn't fully understand. She pushed back. He lost his balance, hit the equipment behind him. Her voice faltered. "There was blood. I remember that." "What about Ethan?" Blake asked. Sarah closed her eyes. "He didn't move," she whispered. "He just watched." That detail lingered heavily in the room. After that, everything became chaos. She continued. "Grant grabbed something. A piece of glass, I think. She was panicking. Reed tried to stop her, but they were all out of control. Her breathing became uneven. I tried to leave. I didn't want to be there anymore. Blake leaned in slightly, and Reed, what happened to him? Sarah shook her head slowly. That's the part I can't fully remember. She pressed her fingers against her temple. I remember him arguing with Ethan. Something about responsibility, about consequences. Did Ethan threaten him? Blake asked. No. Sarah said firmly. That's what didn't make sense. He never threatened anyone. He just exposed everything. A long silence followed. Then Sarah spoke again, more quietly this time. I think Reed realized what was happening before the rest of us did. Blake raised an eyebrow. How so? He saw that Ethan wasn't the one destroying us. She said, we were doing it ourselves. Blake sat back, processing her words. What happened after that? He asked. Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I remember a loud noise, something falling, then pain. She touched her side instinctively. And then nothing. The recording ended there. Days later, new evidence surfaced. Campus security footage previously overlooked revealed something critical. At 12:47 a.m., Ethan Hale was seen leaving Lab Building C, alone, unharmed, calm. But that wasn't the surprising part. At 12:52 a.m., another figure exited the building, Professor Alan Reed. The footage showed him walking slowly, slightly unsteady, but very much alive. He looked around briefly, then disappeared into the darkness beyond the camera's view. The discovery changed everything. Reed was no longer a missing victim. He was a witness, or possibly something more. A search was immediately launched. But just like Ethan, Alan Reed was gone. No phone activity, no financial movement, no confirmed sightings. It was as if both men had simply stepped out of the world. Detective Blake stood once again before the investigation board. Now updated, now even more complicated. 2 dead, 1 survivor, 2 vanished, and a single question that refused to fade: who was truly responsible? Weeks passed. The case slowly grew colder. Public attention shifted elsewhere. But for those who had followed the story closely, one final detail remained. On Ethan Hale's laptop, investigators discovered a scheduled message. It had been set to unlock days after the incident. When they opened it, there was no long explanation, no confession, no apology, just a single line: some truths don't need violence, people bring that themselves. Detective Blake read it several times. Was Ethan a killer? There was no clear evidence that he had physically harmed anyone. Was he innocent? Not entirely. He had manipulated, exposed, and pushed people to their breaking points. Or was he something else entirely? A catalyst? Someone who lit the match but didn't control the fire? And Alan Reed, his disappearance remained a mystery. Some believed he ran to escape the consequences. Others thought he might have gone after Ethan, but no one ever proved anything. Years later, the case of the Westbridge bloodbath is still discussed. Not because of what is known, but because of what isn't. Because in the end, the most disturbing part of the story isn't the violence. It's the realization that the truth, when exposed at the wrong moment, can be far more dangerous than any lie. And somewhere, out there, Ethan Hale may still be watching, waiting for the next truth to reveal.